Now, in the last few couple of videos, we discussed the different ways that you can use and administer Splunk. We basically saw the Splunk web UI, the Splunk CLI, and of course, we also saw that you can use configuration files in the backend. So in this video, we're going to discuss field extractions in Splunk. Field extractions is a very, very important subject. It's through field extractions that you actually assign meaning to the raw data that you index in Splunk. Now, without this meaning to the data, searching, analysis, and so on, interpretation of your data in Splunk is going to become extremely complex. So this is a key subject. Now, at the end of this, we're also going to do a demonstration. In that demonstration, we're going to show how you can, perform field extractions with some CSV file format data. And then an important aspect is that we're also going to see how you index some data into Splunk. Now, please also make sure that you take action on the following. You can now access our Splunk Essentials course on Udemy for free. The Splunk Essentials course basically provides a complete foundational knowledge that's required for you to start your Splunk journey. It's going to provide you with a platform to easily grow your experience and subsequently gain more knowledge through Splunk certifications. What you're going to realize is going to be a combination of some of the videos that we have on this channel with a lot more information. You can check the link in the description below. Now, do you want to pass your very first Splunk certification? I believe the answer is yes. In that case, we've also included a link to the Splunk Core Certified User course that we have on Udemy. This is currently one of the best-selling courses on Udemy at the moment. The course covers a complete course material and sample questions that are required for you to pass the Splunk Core Certified User exam. You can also check the link in the description. Now, for more information about upcoming Splunk certifications, you can visit our website at rakimsolutions.com. And finally, please make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for new videos. Now, let's start the topic of field extractions by discussing why we need to extract fields from data in the first place. So here on my screen, you're going to see an extract from the English Premier League in 2020 to 2020. This is going to be familiar for soccer fans who follow the English Premier League. So this is an extract from Kaggle data sets that we are just using here for our demonstration. If you look at this data, you're going to realize that the first thing here is the date. Maybe so you look at it and say, oh, obviously this looks like the date. This looks like game information. This is the date on which the game was played. This is maybe the time. This is one team. This is another team. Okay, I don't know whether this is the home or away team. I look at all these numbers here. I really don't know what they mean. That is because you don't really have any meaning to this data. You are basically just guessing. And then now, what you want to do with field extractions is that you want to assign field names to the values that are present in this data, because suddenly if you assign field names to the value, it now tells you that, oh, this first field has this name, this second field has this name. So suddenly you have now assigned meaning to this raw data that you have in Splunk. So most data sources do not have field names that are part of the raw data. And that is why we are talking of field extractions, because any data that you have indexed in Splunk that is coming from different data vendors, maybe Cisco, Amazon Web Services, IBM, Nokia, Ericsson, all those different data vendors that you might have within your network, if they had field names that are associated with all the values that they have in their data immediately as they are coming into Splunk, that would have been very, very easy for you, because automatically you can interpret the data and use it. But that is not what generally happens in practice. What happens in practice is that you just have this raw information. It could be logs, it could be transaction information, it could be other stuff, but you don't really can't tell what each field value represents until you extract the data. So what happens now is that you have to perform field extractions. So with the process of field extractions now, what you are doing is that you are associating field names to the values that are present in this data. So if you're looking at it here now, all of a sudden, you say, oh, this other team here, that is Wolves, look at Wolves here, and you say, oh, that was the away team. And then you look at Arsenal, you go down here, you say, oh, Arsenal was the home team. So this is an event that is associated to a game that was played on this date. That's the time of the game. And then you see all these other values now suddenly have meaning. So you can go in here now and properly interpret this data because you have performed your field extractions. Now, if you wanted to just do some search, I can say, no, maybe I want to only search for games that had a score of 5. I want to search only for games that are associated with Arsenal. It's because you've already added meaning to that data. I want to come up with some visualizations like pie charts, like bar charts. I want to perform some analysis for the last 2 weeks and all those things. So without this meaning in the data, it becomes very, very complex for you to do that kind of analysis. Now, most vendors have documentation on how field names are mapped to the values in their raw data. So we just spoke of all these vendors like Cisco, AWS, IBM, and so when you get data from these sources and ingest into Splunk, as I said, the data is not automatically interpreted. That is what happens in most cases. We're going to see some kinds of data like self-describing data that could have meaning associated to it already, but in most cases you have to go back to these vendors and say, what is the documentation that tells me what each field value in your data represents, and then you're going to use that documentation within Splunk in order to perform field extraction, so that when somebody comes in and is searching this data, that meaning is already available there and the data becomes very easy to analyze. So within Splunk Enterprise, there are two ways that you can perform field extractions. So you can perform field extractions at index time. Remember, we discussed indexing before, and we said it's a process that you're actually receiving your data, processing the data, and writing data into disks. And that is being done by an indexer. So during that process of indexing, you can perform field extractions. But one of the things that you have to note is that field extractions at index time can only be performed by Splunk administrators. So people with just the user role and the power role cannot perform field extractions at index time. Now, field extractions can also be performed at search time. So basically, the data has already been indexed into Splunk, and then you only come in to search the data. So even people with the user role, the power role, they can do field extractions at search time, and admins can do it as well. So just about anyone that has the access to Splunk and has access to that data can be able to perform field extractions at search time. Okay, one very important thing to understand when it comes to field extractions in Splunk is the difference between structured and unstructured data, because field extractions happens for these two types of data differently. Now, structured data is data that has a standardized format. So what you're going to notice with structured data is that events have the same format. If you go within structured data, the first event, the second event, the third event, they're all going to have exactly the same structure. Now, let's look at some of the examples of structured data types. The first one here is the comma separated values. I'm very sure that everyone is familiar with what we call CSV, or comma separated values. When you look at a CSV file, what you're going to realize is that the first line is generally the header that represents the field names that are associated with the values in the data. And then now it's going to be followed by the different events that are found within your data. And those events are separated by commas. So you have here, for example, Arsenal here is a club name. And then ARS here, that's the abbreviation. And then you see here is the hex color. And then you see the logo link here. And you go to the second one, Aston Villa and all that. So you see that this first event has the same format as the second event, the same format as the third event, the same format as the fourth event. So this is basically an example of what we call structured data types. The second one here is JSON. So a lot of JSON is also a very, very common structured data type that is used a lot in different applications today. So you also see some structure that is built into it. It's just different from the CSV. So if you look at the JSON, basically the JavaScript object notation, you see that these events are now represented differently. This is one event here, and then you're going to see club name. So it comes in names of field value pairs. So basically this is the field name, this is the value, this is the field name, this is the value, this is the field name, this is the value. So it's just represented a little differently than the CSV format, but it's also another structured data type. Now, there are others like the pipe separated values, you have the tab separated values, and of course, you also have XML, which is the extensible markup language. Now, what is unstructured data? Unstructured data is data that has no standardized structure. So what you're going to notice with unstructured data is that events can have different formats. It is very, very common with log files. So you're going to see some huge log files where there is one event that is completely formatted differently than line 2, is formatted differently than the third one, and this becomes extremely difficult to deal with. So in Splunk, you're going to need like extended knowledge of, say, regular expressions in order to deal with unstructured data, but you realize that structured data is easier to deal with in Splunk. So what are some of the examples of unstructured data? You're going to see things like text files, emails, social media files. There's generally no structure to that. So those types of data are referred to as unstructured data. So let's discuss at a high level what field extractions happen at index time. The first one that we're going to see here is default fields. So while you're indexing your data, you can extract default fields from that data. Default fields are fields like the host. So this is where your data is coming from. So if there was an equipment that maybe you went there and installed a Splunk forwarder to collect logs and send for you into Splunk, then that equipment is what you call your host. When your data is indexed into Splunk, you're going to make sure that the events are stamped with the name of the host. And then the second one is the source. The source typically will be the location within that host where the data is coming from. So if the data was sitting in some files or directories within that host, that is going to be the source of your data. And then another default field is the source type. So the source type is the type of the data. So let's suppose that that data that is coming in was data from a CSV. Then your source type could be CSV, or maybe it was JSON, your source type could be JSON, or maybe it was just some non-standard source type. You can also assign a custom source type and give it a different name. Sometimes you're going to see these host source and source type fields referred to as metadata fields in Splunk, and this is been very important for your certification. There are generally questions around this. So metadata fields are really fields that describe that data that you are indexing into Splunk. The other one is the timestamp. So when you index data into Splunk, you want to extract the timestamp. Now the timestamp typically will be the time at which that event happened. So let's say that there were separate transactions within some data that you are getting into Splunk. So each line of transaction is found in that data is going to have its own timestamp at which that transaction happened. So what you're going to do in Splunk then is to extract this time that is within that data and then associate this timestamp with the data that you have indexed into Splunk. But that is not the only way you can do it, because there are some sources that may not have that time information. So if they don't have it, you can also use the time at which the data was indexed into Splunk. And another one is the index. So the index typically has to be predefined. If you are indexing data into Splunk without creating an index, is going to put that data in the main index as we saw before. But you can predefine an index, and at the time of ingesting data, you can specify that this is the index in which you want to have your data. So those are just some of the default fields. There are a lot more of them that we are not listed here. Now, the second one is extract fields from structured data. So we just saw structured data in the previous slide. Now you can automatically extract fields from structured data at index time. So if your data was like CSV, like JSON, like PSV, and so on, and you are ingesting that data in the Splunk, field extractions is automatically going to happen because Splunk already has configurations built within in that understand these structured data types, and these field extractions are going to automatically be performed for you, so that as you index that data, there's already meaning that's assigned to it. So we saw again CSV, JSON, PSV, and TSV are the big examples here. Now the last one here is that you can extract fields based on custom configurations. Maybe there was something that you were doing at search time way too much all the time, and then you just thought, you know what, I'm going to do this at index time. You can also, just define some field extractions that are going to happen at index time, so that at search time is that meaning that you really wanted to get is already available for you, and you don't have to do it all the time. But then you only have to perform this when it's absolutely necessary, because it can impact performance. And again, as we said, note that this can only be done by administrators. So if you are just someone with a user role and a power role, and there's a field that you preferred for it to be extracted at index time, then you have to speak with an administrator, and the administrator is going to do it in the backend. But note that when you do this, you are already extracting default fields, maybe fields from structured data and so on. If you are adding more and more custom field extractions at index time, it's going to increase the size of your index, and ultimately is going to affect performance. That's why you don't have to use this method way too much. Okay, in the previous slide, we discussed field extractions at index time, but in practice, most field extractions happen at search time, and for a good reason. To think about it in an organization, how many Splunk admins are you going to have? Maybe typically you have few Splunk admins, but there are multiple departments with multiple Splunk users, and that they have their own data sources, and they are all using Splunk, maybe hundreds to thousands of people. And then they have the ability, because as we said, the users, people with the user role and power role, can create their own field extractions. So they're going to be creating field extractions that are going to apply to these data sources that they are using within Splunk. That's why you're going to have a lot more field extractions at search time than at index time. And then this is typically very dynamic, and this is very, very important thing because you are putting power on the hands of Splunk users, so they can do a lot of things within Splunk. It's dynamic. At index time, the field extractions that you perform are generally very static configurations, but at search time, you can extract fields on the fly, you can create knowledge objects, you can do a whole host of things at search time. Now, let's look at some of the field extractions that happen at search time. The first one is you can create knowledge objects in order to extract fields. So you can create delimiter-based field extractions. So these are field extractions for data that is delimited. We saw CSV, comma separated values. That's delimited data. So you see that each event, the field values are separated by commas. So you have pipe separated values, they will be separated by pipes. Tab separated values, they'll be separated by tabs. And you can have different other characters that delimit your data. So most data that is delimited is considered structured data. Now the other one is regular expressions based extraction. So you can perform as well. This is going to typically be for unstructured data. So if you have unstructured data, then you have to perform regex based extractions in Splunk. Now for both delimiter based extractions and regex based extractions, there is a utility in Splunk known as the field extractor utility, which we're going to see that you can use to perform these two types of extractions. Now, the other thing that is worth mentioning here is field aliases and calculated fields. These ones are not really base field extractions, but are extractions that you can do. We consider them extractions, I would say, that you can do on top of your base extractions in Splunk. Field aliases, for example, let's think about it. I have one data source that has um, an IP field, maybe called IP add. I have another data source that has an IP field, and that is just called IP. But I know that both fields have an IP address in them. So I can create an alias in both data sources that is called IP address. Now, if I bring those data sources together and use the IP address field, it's going to give me IP addresses for both data source 1 and data source 2. So that's an important way of using field aliases. And this is heavily used when it comes to Splunk Enterprise Security. Because when you get data for enterprise security into Splunk, what you are trying to do is to perform normalization of that data against a data model that is found in the SIEM, the Splunk Common Information Model. And sometimes creating field aliases helps a lot to do this. Calculated fields the same. Think about calculated fields this way. I have a data source and I have a field that contains the first name. I have another field that contains the last name. But what I really want is a field that contains the full name. Now, how can I do that? I can actually create a new field that's going to be a calculated field that is going to be a concatenation of the first name field and the last name field. Now, you can also perform field extractions just as you're searching your data. So you use your Splunk search processing language, which is what we're going to see in the next video. And then you just extract fields. If you are good in regular expressions, you can just write a regular expression to extract a field for you. You don't really have to save that as a knowledge object in Splunk. So during ad hoc search, it's very dynamic. Maybe you are just troubleshooting, you create a new field, you use it, and you don't really have to save it. And then the last one here that we're going to see is really not, this is really a feature. It's called field discovery. This is a very important concept to understand as well, because I've seen this happen in the exam sometimes. So with field discovery, what you're saying is that you want to extract the name value pairs from your data. Now, when you have already performed your field extractions, if field discovery is not active, you're not going to see that within your data. So what field discovery does is that it looks for the data, and if you have already performed your extractions, it takes the field value pairs that are available in your data and displays them for you. And by default, it's always enabled. But you can disable it. Now, what is one way of disabling it? We saw before, we discussed a little bit about the fast mode, the smart mode, search modes, basically the fast mode, the smart mode, and then we spoke of the verbose mode. Now in the fast mode, field discovery is disabled. So if you want to see the impact of field discovery on your data, just change your search mode to the fast mode, and you realize that on the field sidebar on the left, you're not going to see the fields that you have extracted from your data. I have a file here. This is really English Premier League data from
2022-23 season. So I have this file as a CSV file, which in the theory part, we said that this is a structured data type in Splunk, right? So you're going to see the first line here represents the headers, and then the following lines are just going to be events that are separated by commas, right? I have the same file here saved as a text file, and it really has no headers here. The idea of doing this is just so that Splunk does not recognize this as some structured data type because it's text. All right. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to go to our instance first of all, and then we are going to try to ingest the text file, right, and see what happens. So let me go to our instance. This is the instance that we installed on Windows. So I'm just going to log into it here very quickly. All right. So now we are logged into our instance, right? In order to add data or ingest data into Splunk, index data, so to speak, you can go to your settings. And again, I said this is only available for the admin. So you can go here and then add data, right? So when you go to add data here, what this is going to do is it's going to show you different processors. So you have the upload one here, you have the monitor. So upload, basically, you can just upload files from your computer, right? With the monitor, you can actually monitor files and directories on this instance of Splunk. So basically on my PC, right, where Splunk is installed, and then I can, index that into Splunk. And you can also look at, in this part where you have forwarder, it says data from a Splunk forwarder. So remember that when we were doing the theory part, most of our focus was on Splunk components. We said you can install universal forwarders, heavy forwarders on the source machines that can gather the data and send to you in Splunk based on the configurations that you make. So what we're going to do here is just to upload data. So we're going to do this, and then we're just going to take our text file that we have here, and then we're going to drop that text file here. Yeah, so you see that our file was successfully uploaded, right? What we're going to do now, see the file is text file as well. So we're going to go to the next step here. So what you see here is that as it comes in as text file, it's saying default. So really Splunk does not recognize this as some structured data type, right? And then you see here that it's trying to break the events into separate lines. And then there are some problems. You see, you get some warning signs here. And then look at even this particular one is taking all these lines here and combining into a single event, which is really not good. So something has to be wrong with line breaking. So what we're going to do is let's go to line breaks. And you see that here it's set to auto. We're just going to change this to every line and see what happens. All right, so if we do that, then you see that it looks like it's then breaking down this data. It's taking each event as a separate, or every single line as a separate event, right? Which looks okay now. Now, the next thing we're going to do is look at our metadata fields. Remember, we spoke of the host, source, and source types, and then we were saying that those are metadata fields that extract those at index time, right? And then there are another set of default fields that we're not going to see, but once the data gets in there, we're going to be able to speak about those. Since there is no source type existing that corresponds to this data, we're going to have to save this as our own source type. So I'm just going to call this EPL info, and I'm going to just use that as a description, right? And then I'll do save. So I've created a source type for that, right? And then now you see that's our data there. We now go to input settings. And when we get here, you're not going to be asked to set the value of your host. You already have your source type as EPL info. Now you're going to have to set the host, and then you're going to have to set the index, right? The value of your host here, since we are just taking that file from our local machine, I'm just going to put a constant value there and call it localhost, right? In some situations, you might have the possibility to use a regular expression on the path, or maybe segment in path like that to configure that as a host. And then when it comes to the index, if you had some index pre-configured, an index name, you can just pick it from here. But if you don't have that, you could as well go ahead and create an index, right? We're not going to do that now. So really, as we said, it's going to just put this in the main index, right? Because that's the default index. So let's go to review, and then we hit submit, right? So it says file has been uploaded successfully. Now, if we go to start searching, yeah, what you realize is that, okay, you see all your events here, right? But something doesn't look right. See? So all the fields that you see here are default fields. In your metadata fields and other fields, all these time fields are default fields that are extracted at the index time. And if you go here, you look at it, those are the only fields that you have. But you really don't know what This one stands for this Southampton, Liverpool, all these fours, these D's, these twos. You don't really know what they stand for. So it really means that when this data was indexed, there were no extractions that were performed at index time, because Splunk does not recognize the text file format, right? Like a structured data set type. So it didn't do anything with it. So what we're going to go now and do is that we are going to try to perform field extractions at search time, because it was not done at index time, right? And remember, we saw that to perform field extractions at search time, you can use knowledge objects, you can use the field extractor utility, right? Create your field extractions and save them in Splunk as knowledge objects, so that each time that you're searching your data, is going to act on the data, and then the fields will automatically be extracted for you. So let's go to extract new fields. Okay, so this places us in the field extractor utility, right? And the first step of it is going to ask us to select a sample event. The good news here is that all our events really have the same format, right? Even though this data was never extracted at index time, but when you go within the data, you see that it kind of has some good structure to it, right? So separated by comma. So we're going to select a sample here, and then after we select the sample, we're going to take next, right? When you take next now, it's going to ask us to choose a method that we want to use, right, for the field extractions. Now our data looks structured. Like we said, the events look okay. It looks like every single field value is separated by commas, right? So it's going to be good for us now to use delimiters, because our delimiter here is a comma and everything looks okay. But if we had unstructured data, right, that the format was just random, maybe events had different formats and stuff, we would now try to use a regular expression in order to do that. So those are the two methods we saw. But in this specific case, what applies is delimiters. So we pick delimiters here, and then we put next, right? When we go to next, it's now going to ask us to specify what is the delimiter that we have in our data, right? We could have, there are examples here, space, comma, tab, and all that, or maybe some other delimiter. But what we have is a comma, right? So we pick the comma. So when we pick the comma, look at what happens. So it actually takes that data now, and it just breaks down everything. Takes the values, the first values in the data, say, okay, that's field 1, field 2, field 3, and you see how it's arranged here nicely for you. And remember, when we were having this discussion about field extractions, we did say that data vendors do provide documentation for stuff like this. So this data is coming, suppose it's coming from some vendor in the source, and then now you're going to say, okay, do you have a documentation that tells us how these values in your data are mapped? This one that is showing like date, what is the field name for this, what's the field name for this, what's the field name for that? So when you have that kind of documentation, then you can use it in order to build this field extraction. So basically, rename these fields that have been provided for you here to the corresponding field name, right? We don't have that, so we're going to pretend that these field headers that we have here are the field names that we have in our documentation, right? So I'm just going to copy this and move it to a new document here. So basically, we're saying the first field there is the date, right? So we're going to go back here, and then we're going to say, okay, the field 1 here is the date, right? So we can just put the date here, and then we rename. So when you do that, see what happens. It has changed this first field to date, right? And then we can go again and say, okay, let's just get field 2 is the time, right? We go back, and field 2 is the time, so we put the time here. All right, there we go. And then field 3 says is the home team, and then you do that, you copy field 3, you go here, is the home team, so you do that, right? So that's how you have to rename all the fields. I'm going to post the video and we'll be back when all the fields have been renamed. So all the fields have now been renamed, right? So you can see here that the data really looks nice and clean now for you. You see like you have date, time, home team, away team, and all that, right? So you've successfully renamed all these fields. So now you can go to the next step. When you go to the next step now, it's going to tell you to save this as a field extract. So you're going to save this as a knowledge object basically in Splunk, right? So that the next time you come in and then you're searching your data, it's going to apply this knowledge object to it, and then it's going to use that to extract your field. So I'm just going to say EPL info maybe extractions, right? Something like this. Let's use this to do it, and I'm going to say finish. So when I'm going to say finish, says you have extracted additional fields. That's so success. It has saved that for you in Splunk. So now how do we see how this works? We've created a field extraction, right? So what we can do now is go back to the search and reporting app, and then let's just go to search history and look at that final search that we did here, right? And if we just take that and run it, we're not going to see anything, right? Really, because this is data from like, 2022 to like May 2023 or so, right? So you have to go to all time to be able to see this. So when you go to all time now, you see, oh, things have changed, right? You see the fields have been extracted now. You have all those fields here. And note one thing, this is just a default search that we obtained when we got this data in, but we knew that our data was in the index main and our source type was it like EPL info, right? Info, I guess. Yep, that's what it was. So you can also use that as well to search your data. So you see that all the fields are there now, right? If you go to each event as well, you see that the fields have been extracted. So there's now meaning that is assigned to it. Not only you are seeing these values, now you're seeing the names that are associated to those values, right? Liverpool, this was the away team, date, that was it. And then D is, this was the referee, and then the time and all that. So you have successfully extracted the fields at search time, right? And saved as a knowledge object. So each time you run this, it's going to extract the fields for you. Now, let's say that something went wrong with this, right? You realize that there was a mismatch in there, and then you wanted to fix it. So are you going to have to go again to extract fields and then go fix it there? Absolutely not. You could do that, right? But then you save this as a knowledge object. So let's see how we can access that knowledge object. We can go to settings and fields, right? And then we're going to go to field extractions. And then I'm just going to do EPL here. I do EPL, I say, okay, report EPL info extractions. Oh yeah, that's what we did, right? So if I click on this, it just shows me this. I don't see what I created, all those my fields separated by commas that I saw there. So what's going on, right? But if I come back here, this tells me that this field extraction uses a transform, right? And then it says that this is a transform name here. So what I can do now is go to field transformations. So there are some field extractions that are going to be inline. So they're not going to use transforms. It's just going to be direct. So you are not pointing it into a transform, right? So I'm going to go back here and just go to field transformations, right? And in field transformations as well, I'm going to do EPL. So if I do EPL now, you see it says that there's an EPL info extractions here, but this now is under field transformations, right? If I click this, you see what happens. So it shows me that, oh, this is a delimiter based kind of extractions. The delimiter that was used here is a comma, and these are the field names, right? The field names separated by commas. You just have to specify them here, and this is being applied to the raw data, right? So this is what you can do here. If you had any changes, maybe some kind of mismatch, you can come and do that here. And one thing you have to note is that you can also configure those field extractions directly here. You don't always have to use the field extractor utility. It's there just to guide you, right? Like I said, it's guided, but you really don't have to use it. All right, so now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove all this data that we have here, and then we're just going to go and try to index it again. But now we're going to use the CSV file, right, instead of the text file. So basically, we're going to try to see what happens when we're actually ingesting a structured data type, right? I'm going to go back here and just let me go to search history here, and this is the last thing that I ran. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to run it at all time again. Right, I'm going to delete all this data from this index. Okay, remember, I'm doing this because I have the can delete capability, right? It's not available by default. Even for the admin, you have to add it to the admin before the admin is able to do it. So I'm going to remove all this here. Okay, and then I'm also going to go here and go to source types, and I'm just going to remove that EPL source type that I configured there, right? I could as well remove my field extractions from there. It's not really going to change much. So yeah, let's just say we've successfully deleted this data, right? So I can just go back to my search. Yeah, just refresh it here. Okay, so now everything is back to nice and clean, right? What we want to do now is we are going to ingest that CSV file that we showed before. So let me just go back to it here. So now we're talking, I'll close this one out. We started with doing this, and then extractions were not done at index time, then we did them at search time. So now we're going to ingest this CSV file here. All right, so that's what we're going to do next. To do that, let's go to settings again and go to add data. And now I'm going to go to upload again because we just want to upload the file. And this time around, I'm going to pick the CSV file and just pull it here. Okay. All right. So again, it says file successfully uploaded, and now you see that our file has a .csv extension, right? If we go to next, so what happened? You see that number one, it automatically set the source type as CSV because Splunk recognizes this as a structured data type. So, oh, I have the configuration required to just extract that for you. You don't have to do anything else, right? And then you see that everything is so nicely broken down for you here. You really don't have to do anything in this specific case. It's already done for you. The source type is set. And then all you need to go do then is just go here and again say localhost because it's coming from your own host, right? I'm going to leave the index again, just like the default index. I'm not going to create anything. So I'm going to do again review, and then I'm going to submit. Okay, so it says that it has done it again. File has been updated successfully. Let's now just go and search it and see what difference we're going to have from the one that we ingested at search. Sorry, we extracted at search time. So you see that we have just indexed this data, and all the fields have been extracted for us, right? Because this was a structured data type, and then Splunk understands that it's coming as CSV, and I can just extract the fields at index time. So you don't really have to go and start using the field extractor utility to like create field extractions for this, right? So those are the kind of things that you can do, So here again, you see it's showing you all the different fields. Remember, one important thing we spoke about the search mode menu. We said that these fields display like this because field discovery is active. So you can actually go here and then you do fast mode, and fast mode disables field discovery, right? And when you do that, you see that you don't see all those fields again. You only see a handful of default fields here, and then you see in your events you don't see everything. But if you go back to smart mode, you see that all the fields are there again for you. The same like if you go back to the verbose mode, um, you're going to see all the fields. Okay, so let's now say that we have this data here, and I thought it like, okay, I'm looking at this data and I'm seeing full-time away goals there were 4, full-time home goals there were 4, right? But what I want to have another field which is called full-time total goals, which is going to be the sum of these two, right? So what I can do, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I really want to just use my own index because I know I put this data in index equals main, and then my source type again is equal to EPL info, right? No, my source type here is CSV, sorry, because this is a structured data type. So it set the source type for us already, right? So we do this. Okay, we have our data here, right? So I'm looking at it here and I want to get a sum of these two fields here. So what I can do here, I can just create another field like eval, and then I say full time total goals, right? And I can say this is equal to the sum of those two fields right there. So it's going to give me the sum of full-time away goals plus full-time home goals, right? So I'm going to copy this one, full-time away goals. Just going to put it here. Oh, sorry, what happened? Okay, then, nope, it's a plus sign. Okay, then that's full-time away goals, and I'm going to do full-time home goals as well. So I can copy this and copy. All right, go back here and just paste it, right? So if I run this, now I have just run a distributable streaming command basically here. So this is an eval command that is executing, on this data here, and then it's calculating a new field called full-time total goals, which is the sum of the away goals and the home goals. Now, if I look at it here, I can see like I think it should be added somewhere in here. So you see like full-time total goals now is 8, right? So it's taking this 4 and then adding with this one, right? That's what you get. So you have just evaluated this field, and okay, maybe you just wanted to see like what are the totals that you can have. But at some point, maybe you are thinking, I have to save this as a knowledge object so that each time I log into Splunk. Remember, we saw that you can also do like aliases and calculated fields and save them in Splunk, right? So if I wanted that each time I search this data, I want to be able to see this field. One thing I can just do is, let me duplicate this screen. And then I would go to like settings, fields, and then I'm going to go to calculated fields, right? And then I'm going to say new calculated field, and then I'm going to go, it's in the search app and search, and my source type is CSV. right? Um, then I can just go to the name of that and I look at it here and say the name of that field is this. That's what I want to have in the name, right? And what is the eval expression? The eval expression is just the sum of these two fields here. So I copy these two fields and then I drop here, right? And then I save, right? And then now I can actually close this one. Okay, so I don't really need this again, so to speak. So if that applies quickly, then if I run this, I'm going to see that. So you have, let's wait it, full-time home goals, full-time away, full-time total goals. So you see that it's there now, right? It's already showing here. So you really don't have to go and do an eval again for it because you have now saved it as a calculated field. Anytime that you run any query on this source type, it's going to create that field for you as well. All right, so that's it about extracting fields from data.